Hi, folks. Hi. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome our performers. We have Phoebe Cakes, Kai Kai, and King Lotus Boy. Please welcome to the stage. So everyone looks so beautiful, and they're all wearing white, and we did not coordinate this. Would you like to say hi, folks?
Hi, folks.
Hi, folks.
Hello, everybody.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Beautiful, beautiful students.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming out.
Okay, folks, so I got a bunch of questions for you. Feel free to answer whatever you feel comfortable. If you don't want to answer the question, you're more than welcome to skip it. Our first question is, how has drag and queer art shaped pop culture today? And why do you think many people may not realize the community's contribution to mainstream trends?
I'll start. I really believe that queer culture in general is such a hallmark of American culture. So much of modern day culture just like has been created by Black folks and really been ushered through by Black queer folks. And I think, kind of parried back and forth from like the liberation struggles, especially in the 60s and 70s, like the disco scene, right? That, really brought communities together. So I think that like, especially when we think about popular culture today, that was like really the breeding ground for creating a general community like in this country.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, being a pop culture aficionado myself, I can recognize that a lot gets pillaged by, disenfranchised, subordinated, ghettoized communities, and it gets thrust into the pop scene because somebody thinks it's really cool, a la Voguing by Madonna or Voguing by RuPaul. No, I'm just kidding. Or like, makeup trends, that kind of like were cultivated in the drag community is now part of, glam as we understand it in the mainstream. So I think, part of that appropriation is erasive of like, how we've contributed as a people, a queer people, which is not a monolith, but it's a two-edged sword. I feel like there's also like opportunity for us to kind of platform and bridge kind of like what's been taken and thrust into popular culture by being drag artists, by being active in social media, and creating spaces for ourselves.
I have nothing to add.
Okay. Up to our next question then. In your experience, what are some reasons people choose to come out despite potential stigma and hate? And why is it crucial to protect the right to do so?
Well, I can't speak for every person, right, who chooses to come out. I think, well, one, coming out is something that is kind of unique to Western culture, right? It's not always thought of in the same way in like other countries or even other like geographic, like even different states, right? Like in California, we're so privileged that it's generally a liberal, quote unquote, state, right? And Bay Area is supposedly liberal. Of course, there's still hateful, closed-minded people everywhere. But I think, there's no one way, one right or wrong way to come out. It's a very personal decision. And I think people will come out despite the potential risks of danger and harm because you want to live your truth. You want to be yourself. You want to exist despite every other force that's telling you shouldn't exist. And queer and trans people, especially Black and brown and indigenous people of color, disabled queer and trans people, right? All of us who have lived at the margins, we're used to having to forge our own spaces and to take up space in ways that maybe it's scary, right? So I think that that's kind of like, sometimes it's like you can't live in secret, or you can't live being small, or, a fake version of yourself for so long. I mean, before I came out as trans, I like to say I was just cosplaying as a cis person for most of my life, Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Also, like, I think, we are raised in, a lot of us are raised in this country being told that we are exceptional, right? Like American exceptionalism, and you have freedom, and you have all these things. You are entitled to all of these things. And queer people are kind of bratty. So we're like, you know what? Yeah, I'm entitled to be myself. I get one life, so screw it. Like, let me just do what I want to do.
One thing I think about in terms of like coming out versus not coming out is like queer people do come out, like despite, as you mentioned, like the risks, the real world kind of violence and harm that we're confronted with if we choose to do so, depending on where we are. And obviously we're in a privileged space being here in Berkeley right now, and largely being Californians. But people do come out, and what I think about that is just like, we're animals, I hate to break it to you, humans are animals. And as an animal, one of our primary drives is to survive. So why would someone come out of whatever closet they're in as queer if it's going to jeopardize being alive? And I think, Lotus and Kai kind of hit the nail on the head. It's just like being yourself, expressing yourself, connecting with your community. That is what living is, So remaining kind of in, to use the metaphor of the closet, is a form of like death or non-livingness. So I think like to be alive is to be yourself and to express and share that with the world.
Our next question is, how does your work as a performer contribute to the conversation around people's rights and visibility, especially in regions where queer identities are not supported?
Yeah, I feel like drag is, for a lot of us, it's a way to both put on another persona, but it's also a way to kind of reflect some of our innermost thoughts and feelings and expressions. And with that is, a bit of an ego, right? And there's a bit of hubris you kind of have to indulge in when you're in drag. And I think that almost acts as armor to kind of be subversive and to make a point that, maybe other people are thinking but might not say. So I think that this is a great mask to wear because it's disarming. You're not gonna see me and think that I'm gonna like necessarily harass you or, whatever. Like you might, think that I look weird or something maybe, but you're not going to necessarily be quite as afraid of me, which almost gives me like the power to say something kind of scary and subversive.
And to speak on kind of like my own personal, how I use my own art and platform to advocate for liberation, I mean, as you might already can tell, I'm extremely pro-Palestine, I'm anti-Zionist. I believe that all of us are connected, and the liberation of the Palestinian people, of queer and trans Palestinian people, is where we need to start, right? Because as you probably also know, all of our tax dollars in America, I mean, I know this is an international house, so many of you probably aren't American, lucky you, and we have to contend with this for the rest of our lives, right? That we have all been complicit, we've all been ignorant, we've all been, some of it's not our fault because American culture is so desensitizing to violence and is so brainwashing. I know that's a big word, but it truly is. And there's so many distractions nowadays, right? To numb ourselves out or to look away or to scroll on TikTok. And, I'm not saying that in like a shaming way. It's just like acknowledging the reality that for me personally, right? Like I've been, there's a lot of things in the world that I don't know about or that I haven't taken the time to look more deeply into, but I'm invested in learning about all of the ways that we are connected. And I think that, like Kai said, as drag artists, and especially as, honestly, drag artists, and especially Black and brown drag artists, like y'all are at the forefront of like culture, right, and conversations, and we have a power, right? Like even though, yes, we are at risk of violence every single day, every time we walk down the street looking like this, people listen when you look like this, right? They might not, like what you have to say, they might be a little scared, but a lot of the times people will listen to you when you are presenting yourself in this way, right? And that is something that I believe we all need to use, right? We need to use our platforms, and even if you're not an artist, right? Everyone has a voice, and everyone has a community, and everyone can make an impact, even if it's just one conversation with your neighbor. And so, as someone who lives at the margins of multiple intersections, I'm disabled, I'm chronically ill, neurodivergent, and I also advocate for accessibility and disability justice with my platforms as well, because again, it's all connected. So not all artists do that, but I think by nature, a lot of queer and trans artists and drag artists, we're all very political. I mean, all three of us, because we're all friends and we've all organized together too. It's like our values and our politics are also part of who we are and inseparable from our art as well.
I mean, I have very little to add. I think they said it beautifully. But if I did have to kind of echo something that you said, and I don't think it's strong wording at all, we are programmed. We are all programmed. We are kind of living under a hegemony and power structures that we for a lot of the time can't control or break out of. But I feel like drag is an opportunity for us to kind of like investigate for ourselves. As artists, we get to kind of interrogate and investigate that and deprogram ourselves, decolonize ourselves. But because it's also a form of entertainment, by virtue of that, we get to share kind of our processes in kind of that deprogramming with an audience, and kind of share in this collective, breaking out of.
What would you say to those who are concerned that children attending drag shows or being exposed to LGBTQI+ representation in books and media is harmful?
I spent about 13 years working in education and mostly specializing in behavior, and mostly for folks who are neurodivergent, mostly small children. And I get it. Like I am empathetic to people wanting to shelter their children and to give them the best shot, because it's really important to lay really good foundations for children based on how kids develop, how their brains develop, the things they take in the world, like it informs the kind of person that they become. So I get it. But with that being said, it is so important to just parent your kids. Just be a parent to your child, right? And I know we live in a country where it's hard because you've got to work full time, your partner works full time, childcare is a large percentage of your income. It's difficult to sit and watch everything that your kid watches and to moderate all of their the media that they consume and the things that they see in the world. So I think this is a way, like drag has been politicized because conservatives have nothing else to go on. They have no policies, so they have to do culture war stuff. But it's a really useful cudgel because, this gives parents some control to be able to say, I'm not going to allow my children to see this, But at the end of the day, if a person has a problem with children being at shows, then I would just tell them to not take their kid to a show. and to abide by the American values of freedom and autonomy and personal agency, and not take your kid to the drag show. And also to leave the other parents alone when they are taking their child to age-appropriate story time, or maybe even vaguely age-inappropriate brunches, right? Because at the end of the day, how much violence do children see on television, with or without their parents? Why is violence so much more accepted in our culture than sexual liberation, right? Or sexuality? And I mean, when I say sexuality, like, I think this is a whole nuanced conversation about how people view queer people, how people view people of color, the fact that certain cultures in this country are very repressed, so they see something as sexual when someone else is just like, I'm being a human, right? So, it's tricky. But once again, this is why it's important for, us all to affirm that parents can parent their children as they see fit, and they should allow other parents to parent their children appropriately.
Yeah, I agree with what Kai said. And I also think that there is so much worse stuff out there that is like cis heteronormative programming. Like, look at Dance Moms. Has anyone seen Dance Moms? Like, look at all of these pageants where you have these 5-year-olds like getting their hair bleached and like having to put on all of these uncomfortable things. That's not what's happening at drag shows. That's not what's happening at drag story hours, right? Like, we're just existing and sharing joy and sharing resilience and sharing ourselves. And I can just think about, the way that we're raised, right? It's like, even thinking about like when you see a little kid, right? How many times have you heard a parent when it's like, okay, if it's like a cis boy and a cis girl, they're like, ooh, is that your girlfriend? Is that your boyfriend? And they're like 2 years old, right? So it's like, if anything, our culture and other people are the ones that are pushing a certain sexuality and a certain gender on people. I have never seen a queer or trans person do something like that to a child, right? In fact, like I said, we're mostly just trying to spread joy and also show possibility, right? Because a lot of us, I don't know about you all, but for me, I was closeted both in my gender and my sexuality for a very long time. It wasn't until I came here to UC Berkeley that I was able to fully live my truth and figure out myself, because I connected with other folks, like Phoebe Cakes said earlier about the importance of connecting with community, right? Community that is like you, that looks like you, that has had shared experiences, shared hardship. So if anything, yes, parents can choose, if that is your right, if you don't want your child to see that. But what if your child is also queer? What if your child is also trans? So being able to just expose them, and also they're gonna come into contact with a queer and trans person at some point in their life, right? Maybe not a drag artist, but if you live here, probably, right? So it's just like, yeah, you can only shelter people for so long, and I would just encourage those folks to, just have a more open mind if possible.
You both mentioned drag story time. Could you explain that to the audience about maybe the purpose of that space or the history around that space?
I could do that because I just did a presentation on that yesterday. So it used to be called Drag Queen Story Hour, but hello, not only queens do it. I'm a king and I also participate in it, but it's basically a program where drag artists go into usually public libraries and read picture books and stories to kids. Oftentimes they're really young. I did one this past June at the Berkeley City Library for kids that were like ages 2 to 3 or even like younger than that, and it was really cute. A lot of them didn't understand what was going on, but they liked my outfit, they liked my hair, right? Kids love bright colors, so it was just such a beautiful and healing experience for me. So basically Drag Story Hour is just drag artists reading books to kids, and it actually started right here in San Francisco, I believe in 2011, and now it's become a nationwide organization. There's chapters in New York, in Los Angeles, and then San Francisco as well. So that's what Drag Story Hour is.
How do you see the role of drag evolving in the current climate of anti-LGBTQI+ sentiments and increased legislative attacks on queer communities?
Bring it on. No, I know. Honestly, I think that like there's a myth in culture that I'm constantly like feeling the urge to dispel, that progress is linear. It's not. There's so many things we think of as advancement, and it used to be this way, and now it's this way, and the world doesn't actually work that way. Things will go, there will be progress within a limited scope, maybe within a couple of lifetimes, and then maybe some regression will happen after that or something like that. But progress isn't linear. Sometimes the pendulum swings the other way. And I think that the fight for liberation is, we can't codify in our genes that, we should accept queer people, right? So I think it's always going to be an ongoing struggle. But I also think that we kind of thrive and struggle sometimes. So as far as queer culture goes, I think that we thrive when we are thriving, but we can also thrive when we are struggling. So I do think that there is plenty of great queer art to come out of these dark days that we live in. So I am oddly optimistic about at least the prospects of art. Yeah.
No, I'm also oddly optimistic. I mean, I feel like not every drag performer is gonna be a political warrior or a legislator, and not every drag performance is going to, directly antagonize kind of like these like newer laws. But I will say, just like persisting in your art, persisting as like being the artist that you are, and being presently queer and there for your community is already kind of what we should do and what we've been doing forever. Like Kai said, like, the pendulum swings both ways, and, this isn't the first time queer people have been, in this position. And, it's just our job as creators to be here and ready and to keep doing what we're doing. That being said, drag is beautiful in that it's also kind of like this art form that you can kind of use rhetorically, because we incorporate words and images in it. So we can also espouse change through using it in that way.
How do intercultural differences influence the way drag is performed and perceived, especially when considering your own culture or family background?
I'll try to keep it short and sweet, because I feel like we could talk a lot about our, we all come from different backgrounds culturally. But for me, I always feel like it's an honor to witness a drag artist who is choosing to incorporate parts of their culture into their art. It's a very vulnerable thing, especially acknowledging how much appropriation there is. I was just talking to a friend earlier today, reminiscing on I saw some drag artists doing yellowface, not like in 2022 even. It was not that long ago, and there were white drag artists doing yellowface, pretending to be Chinese, and it was obviously racist. So one, it can be both like an act of resistance and taking up space as yourself and honoring your ancestors, honoring your personal story and your culture, especially in a nation that pretends like it's a melting pot, pretends like everyone's welcome, but is extremely xenophobic, is extremely anti-immigrant here, and is an extremely hard place to be, depending on who you are and your background. However, I think like sometimes when you have a very strong connection to your culture, and sometimes when you share it, people kind of expect that from you, right? Or they expect you to like do only Asian performances, which is also racist and weird, right? Because we're whole people. We're not just our culture or our race or our ethnicity or our gender. We're all of those things, which is what is so beautiful about drag. Like, you get to decide how you present yourself, which parts of your culture you're sharing, which parts are beautiful and joyful and important, and sometimes the parts that are hard, or sometimes the parts that maybe you're speaking out against that have remnants from colonialism, or remnants from, just parts of your culture that don't align with you. So ultimately, I kind of forgot the original question because your boy has ADHD. But I always feel honored because it's a gift for someone to share anything about themselves with you in a very vulnerable way on a stage, but especially something that is part of your culture.
Drag for me has been really eye-opening. The community, particularly in the Bay Area, is very diverse and very culture forward, and it's been an opportunity for me to kind of like investigate kind of like my immigrant story, my ethnic background, my racial history in ways that I wasn't doing when I wasn't doing drag. I know that's a very like, you know, internal way to like look at this very communal art form. But for me, growing up gay and queer and scared, when I finally came out, a lot of these like safer spaces were essentially white spaces because white spaces were safer for whatever reason for queer people. So it wasn't until I started drag that I realized that there was a home for me to like bring all of my identities to the table and to creating art. So to be part of a drag community and art community that is so multifaceted and diverse, is really powerful to be a part of. Not only for my own personal growth, but what we could kind of bring out of each other.
Absolutely, yeah. I feel like there's a lot of catharsis to be had on the stage, and I always say that like drag is kind of a conversation with your audience, and to do a performance is a little bit to answer the audience's question of tell me a little bit about yourself. So I think that this is a like reflecting on your own culture and your own heritage and stuff, especially in these very white spaces, right? Like I feel like there's been at least in my 11 years of doing drag, there has been a lot of work being done by Black and brown performers in the Bay Area to kind of open up these spaces a lot more. These spaces look completely different than they looked back in 2013, 2014. So yeah, it's so wonderful to be able to share parts of yourself and work through some things that you hadn't really thought to work through a little bit. And sometimes that's political, sometimes that's your like traumas, and sometimes that's like part of that decolonizing of yourself process.
Our last set of questions. For those who may feel nervous about supporting drag or LGBTQI+ causes due to cultural or religious beliefs, what advice would you give them?
I think this question is kind of hard to answer because every culture is so different, and even within cultures, people have specific personal experiences, right? But I would say first, just prioritize your own comfort and safety, right? If it's not safe, if you risk, if you fear violence from your peers or your family just for supporting drag or LGBTQ stuff, don't do it, right? Be safe, please. And, hopefully there will be a time where you can do that freely. But also I would encourage you to try and connect with other people, other queer and trans people who share your cultural background, right? And maybe have more one-on-one connections in that way. I just think ultimately prioritizing your safety. There is so much violence in the world. There's so many forces that, are trying to tell us not to exist. So I think you know yourself best, and reach out to other people for support first before putting yourself at risk, I think.
That's good advice.
Agree.
How do drag shows create space for people to discuss difficult topics like anti-LGBTQ+ legislation or censorship or anything inherently political?
I think it goes back to that thing I was saying about like, having this facade allowing you to just say something, or, for me, when I do some of my, when I do like a performance that is political or I really want to make a point, I often will pick a very poppy, like pop song, or, something that is very easy to digest for the audience. it's almost like a compliment sandwich where you're like, oh, she's pretty, and oh, that's something I really have to think about, but I love this song, so it's a little bit easier to swallow that pill.
Yeah, I think I agree. Your compliment sandwiches are beautiful, Kai Kai. I kind of mentioned like how, and I'm parroting a friend, of course, that like drag is this like compound art form. And what do I mean by that? It's like, well, we incorporate like theatrics, lip syncing, sometimes live singing, dancing. There's costumery, makeup, and all of these things. But as I also mentioned, like drag could be also very good rhetorical device because we incorporate words and images into our performances. And I think Kai Kai and Lotus Boy are really great at that. But one thing that all drag kind of has in common is that it also should, if it's good, activate the imagination for the audience. There's always this like element of like gender transgression or augmentation and queering of like these received images or music, and then it's transformed by the art of drag. So in that sense, it activates the part of your imagination where you could imagine yourself as different and imagine the world differently. And I think that's really how drag is powerful.
How does drag contribute to the broader cultural conversation around gender and self-expression?
I think it's self-evident. I don't, yeah, no, I mean, I'm just looking at this panel and just we're so different, and we all do drag, and we all do it our own special way, and I think that's great.
Yeah, I'll just briefly say, I feel like this question has kind of been answered just like by nature of being ourselves and the history of drag as being inherently tied to resistance. Going back to the Stonewall riots where a prominent LGBTQ bar in New York City was raided by the police in 1969 because it was still illegal to be openly queer and trans, to even work at a bar. Like you could have your business shut down if you hired queer or trans people, or even if you served openly gay patrons. Drag used to be outlawed, literally, right? So I feel like that is self-evident in that, you see a drag artist, yeah, we're all so different, and you feel different things looking at us, right? Like, or you have different questions, or you maybe you don't like something, and it makes you think about something differently, or it makes you like be like, oh, actually, I want to look like that, or I want to feel that way on stage. So I think drag is just such a big catalyst for a lot of people's like consciousness or unlearning or unraveling.
So my last question for you all before we get to see your performances is, what brings you queer joy?
Stuff like this, honestly. Hopefully that's not too like, oh, pandering to the audience. But no, like it's amazing that folks are interested and they want to like spend part of their evening like listening to us yapping about our lives and wax poetic about being glorified party clowns, right? But it really is just connecting with community. I, like many queer people, don't have super close connections with my family, with my blood family. So creating found family means a lot, especially because I didn't grow up in California. I'm from Michigan, and it's a far distance to be. But it doesn't. I don't feel homesick unless I leave here, because this is my home. My family's here. Sometimes, figuratively, in that like, if some outsider came in and, is going after my community, even though we don't have like, specific familial bonds, right? Like Lotus Boy is part of my family. You know, Phoebe, like we have kind of a, you know, familial connection in that like we, there's a concept of drag family, and, you know, you have different people, you know, children, mothers, et cetera, and like we share a drag child, right? Like Phoebe's part of my like, you know, kind of stated extended family. And so, you know, it's beautiful to like, to have that community, and we don't have to be blood. We can be from all different walks of life and still be family with each other. So that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, community obviously brings queer joy. Queer community brings queer joy. To bring it back to like drag, and it was National Coming Out Week recently, or National Coming Out Day recently, excuse me. You know, visibility and representation is really magical. It's really important, and as drag artists, we get to be visible for other people and be present for ourselves. I'll just share a personal anecdote and like kind of like how it's touched my life. You know, seeing drag queens, you know, opened up something in me. You know, I got to see that, and I got to eventually participate in it. But there was this time that I like went to work in drag because I'd come from like a photo shoot, and then there's this sickening drag queen out there, Jen Pistar, kind of came out of nowhere, really amazing. They're a dancer too. They're part of like the Access Dance Company now, which is like a differently abled kind of like dance troupe.
Disabled. You could say disabled.
Yeah, I can say disabled. Yeah. And they messaged me once. It's like, I saw you. I ate at your restaurant when you were in drag, and it made me want to do drag. So I owe that. And it was, you know, like I didn't intend it, but like just again, you know, being yourself, sharing your queer truth, you know, can be connecting.
Oh, I didn't know that, Phoebe. That's such a sweet story. And yeah, Jumpy Star is such an amazing performer and a friend of mine. I'll keep it simple. Like, queer joy, yes, being in drag, but also just like having little gay ass moments. Like when we walked in, and I was like, whoa, we're all wearing white, and we didn't plan it. Like even Hawk is wearing white. Like no one planned this, and it's so funny and cute, right? Like little moments like that, I think is brings me joy. Like there's so much. My head is full of like a lot of stuff all the time. So having little moments, just like laugh and smile and compliment each other, that's really where it's at. And finally, seeing other people realize that they want to do drag, right? Like what Phoebe said, or seeing people's drag debut. I have 2 drag sons technically. One of them was kind of already a performer, like an actor, or comedian. But one of my other sons, King Koshari, who was born and raised in Egypt, in Cairo, where there's not a lot of drag going on there, right? Being openly queer, and especially they're also Muslim and they're trans. They weren't able to do that growing up in Egypt. So seeing them like really take up space and be something that they never even knew they could be until they came here, like that is just pure queer joy. And just I think every time someone embodies their true self, we get closer to liberation.
Well, thank you all for being here and sharing your thoughts and knowledge with all of us. I've seen each one of you perform, and there have been many times in which you brought me queer joy, and so I'm very excited to be able to share your talent with all of you here. So we're going to go ahead and clear the stage and get ready for your performances.
Thank you, everyone.